Tom Brown, Part 20. 11 months after Tom disappeared, someone makes a call to Klein and states that she overheard a conversation that she shouldn't have overheard. Klein realizes she's legit when she tells Klein things that only investigators would know. But there were no specifics as to what those things were. Now, who this conversation was between has not yet been given. This anonymous person had overheard that Tom's body was placed on Lake Marvin Road. That's the same road where Tom's backpack was found. So Klein calls for people to apply to volunteer to help look for Tom's body. In October of 2017, about 150 chosen volunteers gathered. They were told to look out for Tom's belongings, including his cell phone, as well as a .25 caliber gun. Since Tom had been missing for almost a year, he instructs everyone to look for human bones, due to the fact that wild hogs or other animals may have gotten to his body. Just 6 minutes into the search, one of the volunteers finds something. I'll try and have some more parts up shortly. Tom Brown, Part 21. One of the volunteers finds an iPhone in the grass and she calls Klein over. It was the same color as Tom's. The phone, however, was in perfect condition. There was no damage to it at all. Klein described it as having looked like it came straight out of the box. There had been heavy rains over the past weeks, but there was no water damage. So most likely it had been dropped there very recently, like within the last few days or so, or even within the last couple hours. Later on, the phone was eventually sent out to the FBI. So the searchers keep looking, but they don't find anything else. Eventually, Klein performs a luminol test in Tom's truck. Luminol is a chemical that detects trace amounts of blood. And of course, the sheriff's department didn't perform this test. So Klein performs the test, they get their light, and they find blood all over Tom's truck. I'm sorry this is so many parts. I'm trying not to leave you guys hanging. Thank you so much for sticking with me and this case. Part 22 will be up shortly. Tom Brown, Part 22. There are many more rumors that start to circulate, and a few are spread about Sheriff Lewis. One in particular is spread about him. Apparently, a texting conversation is seen on someone's phone between Nathan Lewis and the owner of the phone. We're not sure who that is. The alleged conversation says something about assaulting Tom and then throwing him in a wood chipper. Lewis replies, "LOL, I know." Once again, we're not sure how true this is. Other rumors say that Tom and Lewis had a relationship together. Others stated that he was so resentful to Tom's mom, Penny, for reporting him from that movie theater incident that he decided to kill Tom. Lewis comments that people are just judging him and they have no idea why. Maybe it's because you handled this investigation very poorly, sir, but okay. You keep playing the victim, Sheriff Lewis. Moving on. You remember that an iPhone was found on their search for Tom. Well, the results come back from the FBI. And it turns out that the phone belonged to Tom Brown, Part 23. So it turns out that it was, in fact, Tom's phone. But remember, that phone was in perfect condition, so it was likely planted there shortly before the search. Maybe someone wanted it found in that specific spot to deter people from looking in other places. But why wouldn't you also try and just get rid of the phone completely? Klein withheld the exact location of where the search would be until right before it began to prevent people from purposely tampering with the area. Even the volunteer searchers who were chosen didn't know until that very morning. Klein states that the only other people who knew about the location of the search were notified 48 hours before. And who do you think those people were? It was law enforcement. Of course, Lewis denies, but he has now officially put himself on Klein's radar and is now considered a suspect in the case. The next time I do a true crime case, I will make sure to post on my days off. That way you guys do not have to wait as long in between. I apologize about that, but thanks for sticking with me. More tomorrow. Tom Brown, Part 24. So let's recap all the reasons why Lewis is a prime suspect. He returned Tom's truck the very same day it had been found and didn't do any forensics on it. When he found out about Tom wearing diapers, no one else shamed Tom, but he wound up saying that Tom was just sick. He constantly points a finger at things he has absolutely no evidence for, such as Tom being gay or running off with an older man. He denies just about anything that people have said that they've seen him do or heard him say, even when multiple people are witness to it. And what if he was holding a grudge against Penny for filing a complaint about him to the sheriff's department about the incident with Tom and the movie theater? And let's remember, even though Lewis denies it, law enforcement were the only other people who knew about the exact location of where they'd be searching for Tom's remains. Some people have said that Lewis is just inexperienced, but that doesn't really explain everything. Investigator Klein feels that Lewis is corrupt. Tom Brown, Part 25. I think that most of us would agree with Kline that Sheriff Lewis definitely sounds like he's corrupt. Lewis was very focused on the war on drugs. He's even stated something along the lines of, "I love kicking doors in." He had to have known evidence procedures and such while doing drug busts. So I don't feel the "he's inexperienced" is a good enough excuse. Kline also says that Lewis went out of his way to be unhelpful with the case. He says that the sheriff's department was always snotty and snarky when Kline was trying to conduct his investigation. Kline also had brought Chance, the cadaver dog, to the sheriff's department, hoping that he could sniff Tom's backpack after they had found it. But of course, the sheriff's department told Kline no, and Chance was not allowed to sniff the backpack. I wonder why. Kline believes that there has been a cover-up and that law enforcement is involved. Lewis, however, thinks that Kline and Penny are the suspicious ones. Part 26 up shortly. Tom Brown, Part 26. Lewis states that it's suspicious that Tom's phone is found just a few minutes after Kline starts the search. But not because of the reasons I've already discussed. Oh no, it's because he feels that Kline has planted Tom's phone himself, so he'd look like a hero. And because Kline probably got the phone from Penny. Lewis thinks Penny did something peculiar a few weeks after Tom's disappearance. Penny had texted Caleb's mother and asked if Caleb knew the passcode to Tom's phone. But Penny said that Lewis's deputy asked her if she knew the passcode, so she was trying to get it because they kept asking. Of course, the deputy says he didn't ask for it, and without fail, Lewis says that Penny is a liar. But why would they need the passcode if the phone was supposedly missing? They just said that they were just trying to tie up loose ends. Well, you remember that Penny held that press conference to have the sheriff's department hand the case over to the state? Well, a petition was signed by over twice the population of Canadian, and Lewis willingly hands the case over. I'm going to try and finish this all up tomorrow. Tom Brown, Part 27. In February of 2018, Penny gets a call from the Attorney General's office. Remember, Penny is Tom's mom. They ask her and her husband and Tom's brother Tucker to come down for an interview and a polygraph test. However, when Penny takes the polygraph test, her answers bother the investigators, and they believe that she knows more than she is leading on. Penny was not told which questions lead them to believe that she was lying, but Penny believes that it was because they kept asking questions about if she had been communicating with Tom. Those are the questions that she believes may have triggered the investigators' suspicions. This is because Penny had in fact been texting Tom since he went missing. However, Tom never answered back, obviously, since his phone had been turned off since that night it went missing. Penny would text him things like, "Happy Valentine's Day, you were honored at church today, I love you," just things like that. But the investigators have a theory of their own of what they think happened. Tom Brown, Part 28. Investigators believe that Penny knows where Tom's body was. They accuse her of having her husband and/or Tucker help her move Tom's body and hide it. They say that Tom committed schmuicide and that Penny was embarrassed by that, so she wanted to hide the body afterwards. Penny's father had committed that and believes that her paternal grandmother had as well. Penny is distraught about this interrogation, and she tells Tucker not to take the polygraph. She says that Tucker was really struggling with everything and didn't want to lose another son and push him over the edge if the investigators did decide to interrogate him like they did her. Also, something very important to remember, if someone is emotionally distraught and stressed out, it can actually skew the results of their polygraph test, even if they're telling the truth. But I suppose, lucky for Tucker, he was never actually asked to take a polygraph anyway. I guess the investigators decide to move on, and they move on to interview Philip Kline. Tom Brown, Part 29. Investigators at the Attorney General's office tell Kline that they feel that he planted Tom's phone to make himself look like a hero for breaking the case. They then tell Kline that they want him to come down and take a polygraph test, and he says, "Oh, I'll be there tomorrow." And they're like, "No, we gotta schedule it out for a few weeks." But Kline's like, "No, I want to take this thing ASAP." Of course, when he does, he passes no problem. Eventually, investigators move on to Lewis. Lewis says that he's a pretty anxious person and that he didn't want to take the polygraph test. When they try to get a baseline, he says that the examiner had a really hard time. But he does take the test. However, he says that an unfair question was asked. That question was, "Are you involved in the disappearance of Tom Brown?" And that's what he meant. I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like this excuse is such a bit of a stretch, especially when the examiner said that he was being deceitful. So in January of 2019, a sheriff's deputy was out looking for deer antlers as a hobby, and that's when he finds Tom's skull. Finished. Tom Brown, Part 30. Deputy Pine Gregory, who finds Tom's skull, calls Sheriff Lewis to let him know. At least this is what Lewis says happens. Remember, this is over 2 years after Tom went missing. Law enforcement goes out to the scene. Found with the skull was a femur, smaller bones, tennis shoes, parts of blue jeans, as well as part of a driver's license that looked like it had been chewed on by an animal. On that license, it read Tom Kelly Brown. The community gathers for Tom's memorial, including Philip Klein. Tom's dad, Kelly, was upset with how Klein acted at the memorial. Kelly says that Klein kept introducing himself to people as the lead investigator, and Kelly felt like it just wasn't really the time to do so. But Klein felt that there was a killer among them, and he even believed they could be at that memorial. Tom's remains hadn't given them much clue as to what happened to Tom, as there were no bullet wounds to the skull, and there wasn't enough of Tom's body left to do conclusive testing. So of course the rumors start going around even more, and they even start to hurt others. Tom Brown, Part 31. You remember Tom's friend Michael, who was with him the night he disappeared. Well, unfortunately, Michael's dad, Jeff, had committed suicide 2 weeks after Tom's remains were found, and people tried to link the two deaths together. Such as Jeff and Tom had been in a secret romantic relationship, so Michael killed Tom, and Jeff was so distraught that he ended it. But Jeff suffered from depression and bipolar disorder. His asthma also started to get really bad in January of 2019, and he told his wife that he didn't want to continue to not live, not being able to breathe anymore. Other people said that Christian and Caleb, also with Tom the night he disappeared, were just stone cold killers. But Christian does claim that Tom seemed to hide his secrets very well and says that he wore a mask a lot of the time and people didn't really know the real him. The last night that they were together, Tom asked Christian to play 2 specific songs. Christian decides to re-listen to the songs and think about what the lyrics mean, to see if Tom had maybe been trying to tell her something that night. Tom Brown, Part 32. Christian says one of the songs is about moving on and about forgiving all of your enemies and people who have wronged you. But we all have a tendency to listen to sad music at some point, right? But Philip Klein still believes that there's foul play. But let's move on. Penny hasn't heard from the Attorney General's office in months about the case. In August of 2019, 7 months after Tom's remains are found, there's finally an update. Investigators find that there is no reasonable evidence to conclude that foul play led to the death of Tom, so the investigation was being suspended. They had no evidence to rule a cause or manner of death. The only new piece of information that was found was that when they sent Tom's phone to a different lab, they found around 9 p.m. the night he disappeared that he had searched for hotlines. But there is no evidence that Tom had called any of those numbers. Investigators from the Attorney General's office claim that Tom had spilled a bunch of paint in his truck a few months before he disappeared, and that's what lit up on Klein's luminol test, not blood, but Klein strongly disagrees. There was no evidence found upon searching the sheriff's office, but people are not. Tom Brown, Part 33. So we have to take a look at all the evidence that we do have, okay? Tom's phone was in pristine condition when it was found in the field. I mean, it had to have been planted there. There is no doubt in my mind about that. Because remember, it had rained a few weeks prior to that, so the phone would have been wrecked. It was planted, okay? Why did the sheriff's office need Tom's passcode to the phone if the phone was supposedly missing? Why wouldn't the department let the cadaver dog sniff the backpack? Why did they return the truck the same day it was missing and not seal it for evidence? Why does Sheriff Lewis deny and come up with an excuse for everything? Why were Tom's remains found miles from his backpack and his truck and his phone? Who was driving his truck around town that evening after he had left his friends? There are just so many questions. But on November 15th of 2019, Sheriff Nathan Lewis resigns from his position as the sheriff. Tom Brown, Part 34. Allegedly, Lewis falsified reports showing the number of training hours completed by him and his deputies. Of course, he says the allegations were overblown and it was just a paperwork error. But the county judge and attorney tell him that it would be in everyone's best interest if he just resigned. I also believe there was another incident involving Lewis that led him to being investigated at some point. Allegedly, Lewis threatened a juvenile probation officer over a case, and he was investigated for 2 offenses, one being official oppression, so basically I believe that means he was abusing his power, and the other was tampering with a witness for the incident. Do not tell me that this man is not corrupt. Don't you try to tell me. We are almost to the finish line, guys. Bear with me. Tom Brown, Part 35. So remember, Tom's case has been suspended because there's no evidence of how he died, whether he ended it himself, foul play, or natural causes. But if any new evidence was to pop up, the Attorney General's office would look into it. Well, in January of 2020, one of the investigators comes out to Canadian and interviews several people, and people say that she leaves as soon as she came in, basically. She also didn't share any details of the case with anyone. She then showed up again in May and July of that same year. Eventually, it is found out that the Attorney General's office was planning on convening a grand jury in late 2020 or early 2021. So obviously, I'm not sure what the evidence is. We don't know, but some type of evidence, new evidence, has been found enough to basically put this in front of a grand jury. We're so close, guys. Almost done. Tom Brown, part 36. So Klein's theory is this. Tom met someone at the Canadian high school parking lot, which was a common hangout spot. He thinks that person comes up to Tom in his truck, points a .25 caliber at him as a joke, and they accidentally shoot him in the head. But remember, the skull had no evidence of that. Klein believes that someone else helps move Tom's body, and the theory is that the person who shot Tom was a teenager of a prominent family in town, and that person contacted a family member who was an adult for help, and that person then calls Lewis to help cover it up. Now, Klein believes that Lewis does this because that if he didn't do what he was told by this prominent figure in town, that it would have been a bad political move for him. And that's the reason why Lewis kept saying that Tom was a troubled runaway, in hopes that no one would be looking for his body. Lewis just laughs at this theory because it's so ridiculous to him. But Lewis's accusations were never ridiculous. Tom Brown, the final part. So as of right now, all we have are theories. The only people who know what happened were Tom and whoever was with him, if anyone was with him at the time of his death. Was Tom worried about someone finding out about the diapers and decided to end it? Was there an accident and a cover-up? Was Lewis involved? Was Tom struggling with something deeper? Was he struggling with depression? Were there drugs involved? As of right now, we have no idea. But don't forget that hopefully a grand jury should be convening sometime this year. I am assuming, however, that the COVID has delayed this quite a bit, but I'm going to try and keep up with this and update if I find anything out. Thank you all for sticking with me through this long and complicated case. I wanted to shed light on it because this case bothers me, and I hope that a conclusion is found out soon for the sake of Tom's family and for Tom. Tom deserves justice, and his family deserves to know what happened. More true crime to follow.